It was just another busy day at the airport. The low hum of rolling luggage, the crackle of announcements over the loudspeaker, and the endless shuffle of travelers moving from gate to gate created a rhythm that felt ordinary, predictable. People rushed past one another, heads buried in phones or scanning departure boards, unaware of the small dramas unfolding around them. But sometimes, the ordinary hides something entirely unexpected, moments that demand attention, moments that expose injustice. At Gate 12, a black woman stood with her boarding pass in hand. Her expression was polite but tense, her shoulders slightly hunched from the anticipation of another long flight. She had arrived early, followed all procedures, and yet, something was wrong. A gate agent, without explanation, had stopped her from moving forward. Her boarding pass was inspected, double-checked, and then, dismissively, set aside. "You cannot board," the agent said curtly. No reason. No apology. Just authority wrapped in cold indifference. Passengers nearby noticed the tension, some curious, some uncomfortable. A few pulled out their phones, instinctively documenting the interaction, unsure of what might happen next. Whispers filled the air. What did she do? Is this really happening? Most people looked away, pretending not to witness it, trapped in the awkward balance of wanting to help but fearing confrontation. And then, Steven Seagal appeared in the terminal. Calm, composed, and almost invisible amidst the chaos of travelers. No one around him paid much attention. He blended into the crowd, carrying nothing but quiet confidence. He noticed the scene almost immediately, his eyes scanning the woman and the gate agent. He didn't rush, he didn't shout. But something in his posture, the deliberate pace of his steps, made it clear. He was observing, assessing, and preparing to act. The tension at the gate was thick enough to cut with a knife. The woman tried again, asking politely why she couldn't board. The agent gave her nothing but dismissive hand gestures, ignoring the mounting frustration, the growing embarrassment. The small crowd of passengers grew uneasy. People shifted in place, murmured quietly, recording, but doing nothing. The injustice was palpable, heavy in the air, and yet, it seemed like no one had the power, or the courage, to fix it. But that was about to change. In the blink of an eye, the ordinary would shatter, and the quiet strength of one man would alter everything. One person's calm, deliberate action would turn a moment of discrimination into a lesson witnessed by everyone present. In that instant, it was no longer just about a boarding pass. It was about fairness, respect, and courage. And for anyone watching, the air seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment when justice would arrive. Not with noise, not with rage, but with controlled, undeniable authority. The airport was alive with motion, yet in a way that seemed entirely ordinary. Travelers hustled and bustled from terminal to terminal, rolling suitcases clattering softly on polished floors, carts weaving in and out like careful dancers in a never-ending choreography. Announcements over the loudspeakers droned on, a mix of gate changes, delays, and boarding calls, but most people barely noticed. They were absorbed in their own routines, checking phones, reading, or simply trying to pass the time until it was their turn to leave the terminal behind. Amidst the ebb and flow of this organized chaos, Steven Seagal moved with a calmness that contrasted sharply against the energy around him. He walked lightly, without haste, but with a presence that seemed to slow the world wherever he stepped. No camera flashes, no fanfare, no whispered recognition. He was just another traveler on his way. Yet, there was a distinct awareness in his posture, a sharpness in his eyes, the kind that notices everything without seeming to look directly at it. Every movement, every sound, every flicker of emotion in the people around him registered, subtly, quietly, but it all registered. The black woman, standing near Gate 12, tried to maintain her composure. She had been preparing for this trip for weeks, balancing work and personal commitments, and yet here she was, being denied what should have been routine passage onto her flight. The gate agent, clad in a neatly pressed uniform and clipped demeanor, had barely looked at her while delivering the vague excuse. It was as if the woman's presence was a mistake, an inconvenience. Each polite request from her was met with either silence, dismissive gestures, or condescending comments. Passengers nearby glanced occasionally, their faces registering discomfort, curiosity, or hesitation, but few took action. Nearby, families with young children moved quickly, anxious to make connections or keep their kids calm. Business travelers scrolled through emails or stared at spreadsheets on their tablets, oblivious to the tension unfolding just a few feet away. A couple of friends laughed at a joke, unaware that their carefree moment contrasted sharply with the silent injustice happening at the gate. Even the flight attendants making their rounds offered polite smiles and routine greetings, neither acknowledging nor intervening. Steven paused briefly as he approached, giving himself time to observe the scene fully. He noted the way the woman's shoulders slumped under the weight of embarrassment and frustration, the way her hands tightened around her bag strap. He saw the hesitation of the passengers around her, people who wanted to help, perhaps, but were unsure of how, or afraid of confrontation. And he noted the gate agent's subtle smugness, the way they seemed to revel in the quiet authority they held over the woman. It was a moment of balance. Everything appeared calm on the surface. The terminal was filled with movement, sound, and light, but underneath, a different current ran through the crowd. A current of tension, injustice, and anticipation. Most of the people around had their eyes averted, pretending to be immersed in their phones or boarding passes. A few glanced covertly, curiosity mingled with unease. They didn't yet know that the ordinary rhythm of this airport day was about to be disrupted by a single, decisive action. Steven's approach was deliberate, measured, and entirely calm. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He simply positioned himself in a way that allowed him to fully assess the situation without drawing unnecessary attention to himself. His presence alone seemed to alter the atmosphere. The usual noise of the terminal, the rolling carts, the PA announcements, the chatter, suddenly felt quieter, as though the airport itself sensed the tension and paused in anticipation. The woman tried to speak again, her voice quieter this time, careful, polite, almost apologetic. "Excuse me, I just need to board my flight. I have a reservation." Her words fell flat against the invisible wall of authority the gate agent had constructed. Each refusal, each dismissive gesture, was like a weight pressing down, and yet, she refused to back down. There was dignity in her persistence, even in the face of humiliation. Steven's eyes never left the agent, noting every flicker of discomfort, every subtle hesitation. He was calculating, observing, preparing for the moment when he would intervene. This was not about theatrics. This was not about anger or ego. It was about fairness, about protection, about stepping into a situation where justice had momentarily failed. Around them, the passengers continued to move, some casting glances, some pretending not to see, all of them caught in the ordinary rhythm of the airport. But for Steven, for the woman, and for anyone paying attention, the ordinary had already begun to fracture. The calm, familiar world of the airport was holding its breath, waiting for someone to tip the balance and restore what should have been simple and just. In that moment, the stage was set. The tension was tangible, electric, and poised for action. It was a quiet setup, a normal world about to be disrupted, and every detail, from the flicker of a hand, the tightening of a strap, the hushed whispers of nearby travelers, was a signal that something remarkable was about to happen. The moment that should have been routine, the simple act of boarding a flight, had shifted into something entirely different. The black woman, standing near gate 12, felt a tightening in her chest, a mix of confusion and frustration as the gate agent continued to block her way. Her polite requests, her explanations, her calm demeanor, none of it seemed to matter. Each attempt to assert her right to board was met with a dismissive gesture or a curt, "No." The air was thick with tension, and the invisible line between civility and disrespect had been crossed. Passengers nearby began to notice. A family waiting with young children glanced up from their devices, eyebrows knitting together. Two businessmen paused mid-conversation, sensing that something was off. Others started pulling out phones, recording what was happening. Not for entertainment, not for drama, though that's often how such moments are captured, but because instinctively, people know when injustice is unfolding. Most, however, still hesitated to step in. There's a peculiar inertia in public spaces. Everyone sees, everyone feels, but few act. And then came the first outright insult, a verbal jab, casual, cruel, and loud enough for anyone near the gate to hear. The gate agent leaned slightly toward their colleagues, smirked, and muttered something dismissive about the woman's attitude. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't professional. It was a deliberate attempt to humiliate, and it landed exactly as intended. The woman's face tightened, her polite composure wavering. She clenched the strap of her bag, lips pressed together, eyes flicking nervously to the nearby crowd, as though seeking some sign of support. A few passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances, a mix of anger and helplessness washing over them. One man muttered, "That's not right," but no one stepped forward. The silence of the majority was deafening, broken only by the hum of luggage and distant announcements. Steven Seagal's presence, however, was different. He had been watching calmly, assessing the situation with a measured gaze that took in every detail. He noticed the subtle shifts, the tightening of the woman's hands, the micro-expressions on the agent's face, the hesitation in the crowd. He didn't move immediately. He didn't yell or call attention to himself. He waited, observing the full scale of the disrespect, understanding that timing, patience, and presence were critical. The gate agent didn't stop. Instead, the dismissive comments escalated. A snide remark about the woman's attitude turned into a more pointed insult about her not belonging here. Whispers and murmurs spread through the nearby passengers. The injustice was now undeniable. People's emotions were no longer passive, they were beginning to simmer with discomfort, shame, and anger. The room had shifted. What once felt normal, just another busy airport day, was now a place of tension, of moral reckoning. Audience engagement question. Have you ever been in a public place and witnessed someone being treated unfairly? How did it make you feel? Did you stay silent, or did you speak up? The woman tried again, her voice trembling slightly now, but still controlled. I have a confirmed boarding pass. I followed all procedures. I just need to get on my flight. Her words were calm, rational, and entirely reasonable. But reason was irrelevant to the agent's prejudice. The dismissive gestures, the sighs, the rolling eyes, all signaled that she was unwelcome. It was a calculated form of disrespect, designed not only to deny access but to humiliate. Passengers were now recording, whispers had turned into murmurs, and a few brave souls began to speak under their breath, voicing quiet objections. This is ridiculous. She didn't do anything wrong. Why is this happening? Still, the momentum of silence and inaction kept the woman trapped in this moment of public humiliation. Steven Seagal's decision point was approaching. Years of experience, of discipline, awareness, and knowing when to act, had taught him that some moments require intervention, but timing is everything. Acting too soon could escalate the situation unnecessarily. Acting too late could allow injustice to prevail. He adjusted his posture slightly, took a measured step forward, and prepared himself to speak, fully aware of the consequences. This was not about ego. This was about dignity, fairness, and standing up for what is right. Audience engagement question. If you were in the woman's shoes, how would you feel right now? Would you try to argue, or stay quiet? And if you were a bystander, would you intervene or remain silent? The agent's smirk faltered slightly as Steven's calm gaze landed on them. There was no shouting, no visible threat, just a quiet, undeniable authority in his presence. And in that small but significant shift, the atmosphere began to change. The tension was now palpable, not just discomfort, but a collective awareness among the crowd that something needed to be done. The ordinary airport rhythm had been fractured, and the stage was set for a confrontation that would ultimately restore order, dignity, and fairness. Audience engagement question. Have you ever witnessed someone quietly but decisively take control of a situation like this? How did it feel to watch it unfold? At that moment, the crowd held its breath. They didn't yet know the full resolution, but they sensed that this was no ordinary airport incident. What had begun as routine boarding had become a test, not of strength or violence, but of courage, integrity, and the willingness to stand up against injustice. And everyone present, knowingly or unknowingly, was about to witness a lesson that would resonate far beyond the walls of the terminal. Steven Seagal stood quietly a few steps away from Gate 12, his eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before him. The airport's usual chaos, the hum of rolling luggage, the chatter of travelers, the distant Pennsylvania announcements, continued around him, yet all of it felt distant, muted by the weight of what was happening in front of him. A black woman, dignified and composed despite the indignity, was being treated unfairly, her calmness met with disrespect and hostility. The gate agent's smirk, the dismissive gestures, and the cold authority in their tone were blatant, yet no one had stepped in. For Steven, this was a familiar calculation. Years of discipline, of learning to control both body and mind, had taught him the importance of patience, timing, and observation. He didn't act impulsively. He didn't need to. Every micro-movement, every subtle cue mattered. A hasty action could escalate a situation unnecessarily, but hesitation could allow injustice to persist. He weighed the options in silence, analyzing not only the agent but the crowd, the woman, and the ripple effect of every possible choice. He noticed the small signs of stress around the woman, her hands gripping her bag strap a little tighter, the faint flicker of tension in her eyes, the slight tremor in her voice as she repeated her request to board. He noticed the growing discomfort among the passengers, the quiet murmurs and whispers that had begun to rise. He observed the agent, confident in their authority, yet now slightly unsure under the weight of so many eyes and cameras. And he felt the responsibility settle on his shoulders, not a heavy burden, but a deliberate recognition that he could change the outcome if he chose to act. The decision was not about ego. It was not about confrontation. It was about fairness, dignity, and the courage to stand up when someone else had been wronged. Steven's training had always emphasized control over reaction, strategy over brute force, patience over impulsivity. He knew he could resolve this in seconds, but the question was how, to make a lasting impression, to correct the injustice without escalating violence or chaos. He took a deep breath, centering himself, feeling the calm strength that came from years of discipline. His presence alone conveyed authority, but he understood that words would carry weight too. The moment called for a combination of both, precise, measured action, and a clear moral stance. Steven finally stepped forward, deliberately, without haste or aggression. His eyes met the gate agent's, unwavering, steady, and firm. There was no anger, no threat, only the quiet assertion of authority. Every movement was intentional, every gesture controlled. He positioned himself so that both the agent and the passengers could see him fully, a figure of calm focus in a situation where panic, frustration, and uncertainty had begun to ripple through the crowd. He placed a gentle hand near the woman's arm, not to touch her unnecessarily, but to offer reassurance. A silent signal, "Stay calm, everything will be handled." Then, his voice, low but commanding, broke through the tension. "This woman has done nothing wrong. She should board her flight immediately." The words were simple, but their weight was undeniable. The agent's smirk faltered slightly. The murmurs among the passengers grew louder, curiosity turning into expectation. The air itself seemed to change, the tension thickening, and yet, the woman did not need to speak. Her dignity, combined with Steven's intervention, had shifted the balance. Audience engagement question. If you were Steven in this moment, would you step in quietly like he did, or would you react differently? How do you decide when to intervene in a public injustice? Steven held his gaze on the agent, giving them a chance to correct the situation voluntarily. This was the crucial moment, the opportunity for them to do the right thing without further escalation. His eyes were calm but firm, communicating both authority and patience, a silent warning that injustice would not be tolerated. He noticed a few passengers now inching closer, their curiosity turning into quiet support. Their cameras recorded not just the conflict, but the power of calm intervention. The woman exhaled slightly, reassured by his presence. For her, it was no longer a solitary struggle. Someone had chosen to stand with her. Steven's inner calculation was complete. He understood the dynamics, assessed the risks, and decided he would act, not with anger, but with controlled authority. The situation was delicate. He had the power to escalate or resolve it. He chose resolution, dignity, and protection. In that moment, the ordinary airport scene, the rolling carts, the PA announcements, the chatter of travelers, had faded into the background. All that remained was the silent tension of injustice, and the poised decision of a man who understood that the strongest action is often the one that maintains control while delivering justice. The stage was set. The moral choice had been made. And now, all that remained was the confrontation itself, the moment when the gate agent would be forced to reckon with the consequences of their actions, witnessed by everyone present. Audience engagement question. If you were standing there, could you have the patience and discipline to act decisively without anger? How would you approach the situation differently, if at all? Have you ever hesitated to intervene in a situation because you weren't sure what to do? What would give you the courage to act? Steven Seagal had made his decision. His voice, calm yet commanding, had already cut through the tension like a knife through fog. This woman has done nothing wrong. She should board her flight immediately. The gate agent froze, the smirk fading from their face. For a split second, There was hesitation, a crack in the armor of assumed authority. The passengers noticed, shifting their gaze to the unfolding moment. Phones were raised, whispers grew louder, and a palpable energy spread through the crowd. Something was about to happen. But the agent wasn't finished. Pride and stubbornness surged, masking the recognition of being wrong. "Sir, I'm just doing my job. She cannot board right now." It was a classic defense, the kind of bureaucratic shield meant to deflect responsibility. The tension ratcheted higher. The woman, standing beside Steven, tried to interject, her voice measured, polite. "I followed all procedures. Please allow me to board." Her words were reason and dignity, yet they fell against the wall of ego and indifference. The murmur of the crowd grew. Some passengers spoke up now, quietly, urging the agent to reconsider. "She's right. Let her on the flight. This isn't fair." But the gate agent dug in, escalating the situation further. Their tone sharpened, gestures became more forceful. "Sir, you need to leave. You're interfering. This is not your concern." Audience engagement question. If you were a bystander here, would you speak up or stay silent? How far would you go to stand with someone being treated unfairly? Steven didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stepped closer, closing the small gap between authority and defiance, and spoke evenly, his tone carrying the weight of experience and control. "I am fully aware of the situation. You are in the wrong. Correct this immediately, or there will be consequences." His calm authority had a ripple effect. The nearby passengers straightened, whispering to each other in astonishment. Cameras recorded every micro-expression, every subtle movement, the tension between control and arrogance, the invisible battle of moral authority versus institutional power. The agent's frustration boiled over. Their face reddened, their hands trembling slightly. "Sir, I will not be told what to do. You cannot." Before the words finished, Steven interrupted, not with aggression, but with undeniable presence. His eyes locked on the agent, calm but firm, and the subtle posture of his body communicated something that words alone could not. They had no choice but to comply. The surrounding crowd could feel it. The ordinary rhythm of the airport had shattered. Even travelers who had been trying to ignore the situation now leaned in, captivated by the quiet storm unfolding before them. The woman exhaled, her shoulders relaxing slightly. She no longer felt alone. For the first time since being denied boarding, someone powerful and unflinching had her back. Finally, the gate agent's facade cracked. They muttered, almost to themselves, "Fine. Boarding." The words were reluctant, but the action was undeniable. Passengers who had been recording stopped whispering and began murmuring encouragement. Some nodded toward Steven, a silent acknowledgement of the quiet courage and authority he displayed. Audience engagement question. Have you ever witnessed someone assert authority without yelling or fighting? How did it make you feel? Could you maintain that level of control in a high-stakes situation? The woman stepped forward, grateful but composed. She presented her boarding pass once again, and this time, it was accepted immediately. The small act of recognition, the simple return of dignity, was enough to shift the entire energy of the gate. What had started as humiliation had transformed into a lesson in courage, fairness, and moral authority. Meanwhile, Steven didn't linger. He didn't gloat. He remained calm, understated, and observant. He understood the delicate balance of justice. The situation had been corrected, the woman's rights restored, and yet there was no need to escalate beyond what was necessary. Control had triumphed over chaos. Integrity had overcome arrogance. Audience engagement question. When faced with injustice, would you act boldly like Steven, or would you hesitate? What stops most people from standing up in moments like this? By the time security and airport management arrived, the immediate confrontation had ended. The gate agent, realizing the situation could not continue, stepped aside. The passengers around whispered in disbelief, some still recording, knowing they had witnessed something rare, decisive, controlled action in the face of blatant unfairness. And for the woman, the boarding pass finally accepted in her hand, the ordeal was over. But the lesson remained: courage isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's quiet, deliberate, and controlled, yet undeniably powerful. The airport terminal had shifted. What once was ordinary, rolling luggage, distant announcements, passengers chatting, had become a stage for justice in motion. Steven Seagal stood firmly beside the woman, his presence calm yet undeniable. The gate agent had finally relented, allowing her to board, but the true authority that needed addressing was yet to be confronted: the pilot. The man responsible for enforcing discriminatory behavior had remained on the sidelines, observing the scene with a mix of defensiveness and arrogance. He had believed that his authority could go unchecked, that his decisions would be accepted without question. He had underestimated one thing: the quiet, measured power of a man trained to recognize injustice and act decisively. Steven approached the pilot slowly, deliberately, every step controlled. He did not shout. He did not gesticulate wildly. He carried himself with a calm authority that drew attention without demanding it. The pilot, sensing the shift in energy, straightened, but there was unease now where previously there had been confidence. He knew he had overstepped, and now the consequences were approaching, not in anger, but in undeniable, calculated authority. Audience engagement question. Have you ever faced someone abusing power, knowing they could get away with it? How would you react if you had the ability to confront them calmly but decisively? Steven's voice was low, steady, and carried over the muted noise of the terminal. You have denied a passenger her right to board based on nothing but prejudice. That behavior will not be tolerated. The pilot opened his mouth to respond, to argue, to justify his actions, but Steven's calm gaze held him in place. There was no rage in Seagal's eyes, only focus, precision, and the quiet force of authority. Every inch of his posture spoke volumes. The woman's dignity mattered, injustice had been noticed, and the consequences were inevitable. Passengers watched in awe. Some recorded, others simply stared, captivated by the rare sight of decisive moral authority. The tension that had been simmering throughout the terminal now reached its apex. People were aware, consciously or not, that a public reckoning was unfolding. The pilot could feel it too, the weight of every eye in the room, the collective expectation that fairness would prevail. Steven continued, deliberate and measured. You still have a chance to do what's right. Step aside, and accept accountability. Ignore this, and the consequences will follow. The pilot hesitated, pride battling the reality of the situation. For a moment, there was silence, a charged pause in which every passenger and traveler seemed to hold their breath. The ordinary airport world had evaporated. The scene was no longer about flight schedules or boarding passes. It was about power, integrity, and the courage to act rightly. Audience engagement question. If you were in the pilot's position, confronted calmly but firmly like this, would you accept responsibility or dig in? What stops people from admitting when they are wrong? The pilot's resistance crumbled. Security personnel, summoned by the subtle but firm command in Steven's presence, approached. The pilot was formally removed from duty. The action was swift, professional, and precise. No theatrics, no drama beyond the undeniable fact that injustice had consequences. The crowd murmured in recognition, not with cheers, but with a sense of respect for the lesson that had unfolded before them. Meanwhile, the woman, finally able to board safely, glanced back, meeting Steven's calm eyes. Her expression carried relief, gratitude, and a quiet acknowledgement that her dignity had been preserved. What had begun as a routine act of boarding a flight had become a public lesson in courage, authority, and moral clarity. Audience engagement question. How would it feel to witness someone take control of a situation so calmly yet decisively? Could you maintain that level of composure if you were in Steven's shoes? Steven didn't linger. He allowed security to handle the pilot professionally, stepping back to ensure that the resolution remained controlled. The lesson had been made clear: true authority is not loud or aggressive, it is decisive, precise, and rooted in principle. The passengers, airport staff, and even fellow travelers absorbed this lesson silently, many recording the moment to share it far beyond the terminal walls. The pilot, escorted from the terminal, had no words left. His arrogance and indifference had been replaced by quiet recognition of wrongdoing, and the consequences had been immediate. No shouting, no chaos, no unnecessary conflict. Just authority exercised with precision, moral clarity, and control. For the woman, the ordeal was over, but the lesson lingered. Courage does not always require confrontation. Power does not always need aggression. Sometimes, the strongest action is one taken calmly, deliberately, with unwavering focus on fairness and dignity. The crowd slowly dispersed, returning to the rhythm of the airport, but the impact of what had occurred remained. Stories would be told, videos would circulate, and the lesson in justice, courage, and controlled authority would reach far beyond Gate 12. In that moment, one truth became undeniable. Real strength is measured not by rage, but by the ability to protect, correct, and stand up for what is right, without losing control. White heavy check mark word count, 800 words. Do you think more people would act against injustice if they understood the power of calm, decisive action? Why or why not? The tension in the terminal had finally dissipated, replaced by a quiet sense of resolution. The woman, her boarding pass accepted and her dignity intact, stepped forward with measured calm. Her eyes met Steven Seagal's briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, a wordless thank you for standing up when no one else would. She was no longer alone, and the crowd could feel it. What had started as a moment of humiliation had transformed into a public lesson in courage, authority, and the quiet strength of standing up for what is right. Passengers who had been recording the incident continued to whisper, sharing their astonishment with each other. The energy in the terminal had shifted. People who had once hurried past, lost in their own routines, now paused, reflecting on what they had just witnessed. Some nodded toward Steven, silently recognizing the impact of his calm, decisive intervention. Others shared murmurs of disbelief, slowly realizing that justice had been delivered, not with anger, not with violence, but with control, focus, and principle. Security personnel had removed the pilot from duty. The arrogance and prejudice that had caused the incident were replaced by consequences that were immediate, measured, and undeniable. The lesson was clear: actions rooted in bias and discrimination would not go unchecked. And the audience, the passengers, travelers, and airport staff, had seen it firsthand. They didn't need cheering or applause to understand the weight of what had occurred. The silence in the terminal carried its own power, a reflection of respect for justice calmly enforced. Audience engagement question. Have you ever witnessed someone take a stand quietly but effectively? How did it make you feel? Would you have had the courage to act similarly? Steven Seagal did not linger. He did not need recognition. He simply ensured that the situation was resolved and the woman's rights restored. The ordinary flow of the airport resumed, rolling luggage, distant announcements, conversations, but everyone present had been changed in subtle but lasting ways. They had seen a moment where authority was exercised not for ego, but for principle. A moment where fairness and dignity were restored, and injustice was addressed decisively. The woman boarded her flight, her posture straight and calm, carrying herself with the dignity she had been denied moments before. Steven stepped back, observing the final resolution, ensuring that no further issues arose. His intervention had been precise, controlled, and impactful, a demonstration of true strength, which lies not in loud confrontation but in calm, decisive action. Audience engagement question. If you were in her position, how would you have felt when someone stepped in for you? Do you think more people would act against injustice if they saw the power of calm intervention? By the next morning, videos of the incident were circulating online. People shared not because of shock or spectacle, but because of the lesson it carried. The story resonated far beyond the airport terminal. The strongest person in the room isn't the loudest, the most aggressive, or the most intimidating. True strength is the ability to protect, correct, and stand up for what is right, without losing control. Social media erupted with comments reflecting awe, admiration, and reflection. People discussed how rare it is to see courage exercised with precision, how inspiring it is when someone acts decisively to stop injustice without escalating conflict. The story became a symbol: courage, discipline, and moral authority triumph over arrogance and prejudice. Steven Seagal had demonstrated something rare and timeless. You don't need violence to enforce justice. You don't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes, the quiet, unwavering application of authority, guided by principle and focus, is more powerful than any outburst. Audience engagement question. Do you believe real strength comes from control rather than anger? Would you have the courage to intervene in a situation like this? Type respect in the comments if you do, and share your thoughts. As the woman's plane took off, she looked back one last time, her gaze carrying gratitude and quiet pride. The passengers, staff, and travelers who had witnessed the incident carried its lesson with them, knowing they had seen something extraordinary. The demonstration of power without chaos, justice without aggression, and courage without ego. The terminal slowly returned to its ordinary rhythm, but the impact of what had transpired lingered in every glance, every whisper, and every shared video. One thing was clear. Standing up for what is right doesn't always require anger, it requires awareness, discipline, and decisive action. That day, Steven Seagal reminded everyone present, and the world watching online, that real strength is measured by control, courage, and the ability to protect the powerless without losing composure.